Welcome to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners optimize income, pay less in tax, and invest prudently. Here's your host, Grant Bledsoe.
Hello, everybody. Grant Bledsoe here. Welcome back to Grow Money Business. This week on the show, our guest is Patrick Esposito, who joins us today to talk about the science of business success. Patrick is a really interesting dude, an exceptionally smart dude, and has had quite a career. Patrick went to law school at Georgetown, figured out pretty early on that he did not want to work in public service as he had initially thought he would, and so he got into technology consulting. And he had a client who hired he and his team on full time. They eventually grew and sold to a larger competitor. Then he did the exact same thing in another consulting company, after which he started two other organizations, one called ACME, the other called Initiative Labs, that helps medium and small-sized businesses remain innovative and make sure that they succeed long-term pursuant to the needs of the owners. We had him on the show today because he's recently published a book called The Structure of Success. And as you might imagine, he has a whole bunch of both anecdotal and empirical evidence based on his career working with so many companies through this growth and exit process, where he's identified 8 levers of long-term business success that he wrote about in this book. This is one of the really interesting conversations that I've had on the show. I really enjoyed meeting Patrick and talking about all these issues. He's a really articulate, really smart guy, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as well. Hey everyone, I need to interject quickly to remind you all that nothing found in today's episode or any other episode of Grow Money Business should be considered financial, investing, legal, tax, fitness, or even relationship advice. It's content that you're free to use and to deploy on your own terms. And before taking any actions on content found on the show, please do consult with your tax professional, your attorney, or your financial planner. If you don't have a financial planner, head on over to threeoakswealth.com to learn more about what we do in terms of financial planning and investments and how we help clients on an ongoing basis. There we go, Patrick. Welcome to the show. I am really looking forward to this conversation. I am really interested in your book. I have to admit, I have not read it myself quite yet, but it has been added to the list, and I look forward to. So thanks for spending a little time with us today.
Excellent, Grant. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Why don't we start off with a little bit about your background? Where did your professional career start, and how did that lead you to the book?
Great question. I think probably like a lot of your listeners and your clients in your day job, right, from the financial planning standpoint, I started out, not where I ended up, right? So I navigated to running my own businesses, not so much with the intent of ending up there, but, went to law school, practiced briefly as a lawyer, had a vision that I would engage in public service. And I quickly found out I lacked the patience it requires to be in public service. So
very diplomatic way of phrasing that.
Exactly, right? It takes a lot of patience, and those who do it, I'm very impressed by what they do, because it really does take a degree of patience that most of us, right, who are running businesses, like a lot of your clients are, that we lack. And so I quickly realized that I was probably, better suited for the business world, and decided that rather than engaging in public service, I would attempt to create some jobs and create some technology-oriented jobs in, a part of the country, Appalachia, that there weren't a lot of those types of jobs at that time. This was, early 2000s, right? So started a company that was doing, I would say, technology-oriented consulting, and ultimately, as we went on the journey, right, had a grand strategy of what we were going to make from a software perspective that was driven by our consulting business, realized, less than a year into it, that was a really bad idea, ended up pivoting, and frankly came out of it with, some venture backing, and ultimately software that was really an early Internet of Things middleware platform that we ended up having our team and the technologies acquired by publicly traded market leader, and ended up with a similar formula playing out with a company that started up in central Wisconsin that was focused on non-pneumatic or airless tires. Again, same type of trajectory, some consulting, some investment. In this case, it was all founder investment on the second company, and then an acquisition by a publicly traded market leader. And since that time, have ended up trying to help others. So through two different businesses, ACME General Corp, we help back to sort of that public service mindedness. We try to help government agencies and government prime contractors do a better job harnessing innovation opportunities to create, new solutions for, everybody from those who are, working in state and local government to those who are helping to defend our country. And then with the latest business I've launched, Initiative Labs, we do basically two things. We help businesses kick off the use of the framework from the Structure of Success book. And we do speaking engagements related to the topics in that book. So rather than being hands-on in sort of a tactical consulting model, it's more of an advisory model that we use to help folks who have their own small and medium-sized businesses that they want to either grow stronger, transition to, either generational transition or to an exit or, a partial exit. So
Interesting. Are you from Appalachia? Why Appalachia initially?
Yeah, so grew up in West Virginia and, obviously have an affinity for the place. Spent some time in graduate school in the UK and then law school in DC and realized that, I wanted to try to impact a part of the country that I felt like needed, right, some engagement, right, in initially a public service role, and then later, as I've been for the past, I guess, 2 decades, trying to grow technology-oriented jobs.
Oh, very cool. Okay. So consulting leading to an exit, another consulting gig leading to an exit.
Yeah.
Then you start ACME, which is basically more of an advisory role instead of consulting,
Right.
to help businesses along their own path. And then you start Innovation Labs thereafter, which does something similar in a slightly different capacity.
Yep.
And so at this point, you've got two ground level case studies of growth to exit under your belt. You've started 2 other organizations that have a whole lot of ground level experience with your clients going through that same evolution, and so I suspect you're starting to get some commonalities between the success stories. That's kind of the framework for the book. Is that where it all generated from?
That's exactly right. And I left out sort of probably 2 important pieces as well, which was in the first acquisition, stayed on to support the transition for 18 months. So learned a lot of great lessons from being in a large, multinational market leader. And then, between the first 2 and these next 2, I ended up in a great supporting role as chief legal and risk officer for a regional financial services company that was doing traditional retail banking, doing mortgage businesses, insurance businesses, and ultimately investment businesses in the fintech space. And so they were publicly traded. While I was there, they were in the process of getting ready to move from over the counter to NASDAQ. And so it was a great learning experience, right, to be in sort of that mid-size operation after doing startups, being in a large company, get that sort of, middle, medium-sized business that's growing to large. And then, to the point here, realize that what I really like is small and, helping folks who are leading small organizations, most of which are businesses, but some of which, are nonprofits or government agencies, help to sort of really tune their organization models to set themselves up for success. And frankly, less hours of work when you can do it, and less sleepless nights. So
walk us through some of the foundation then. What does the structure of success look like?
So, the structure of success framework, it's interesting, right? Because most of it is based on a lot of the anecdotal experiences from starting and growing and ultimately exiting 2 businesses, as well as advising others, as I continued past that journey. But I decided that sometimes anecdotal evidence, right, the things you see and things you think may or may not be right. So one of the things that I decided to do, as I was getting ready to launch ACME and getting ready to later now launch Initiative Labs, was decided to ask other folks who are running their own small to medium sized businesses successfully, right? And so we had some criteria for what does success look like, and asked 100 of these folks an array of questions around how they structured their businesses, what put them on pathways to either success or failure, right? Either in their current business or in prior ventures. And as it turns out, the 8 factors that tend to drive success that I sort of thought were there anecdotally were there also in this survey, right? And so now we have this sort of empirical data set where we can take some of those anecdotal pieces and look at the factors, right? And so the factors that we found that obviously influence success, probably not going to be a surprise to you, probably not going to be a surprise to your clients, and probably not going to be a surprise to most of your listeners. Although when you're actively running a business, it's hard sometimes to realize how important these factors are until either something has gone wrong or until you've had a chance to, run things to an exit and realized what went right or what went wrong. So, it's obviously your governance team and how you involve them in decision making. We'll talk about that more here in a second. Your management team, how you involve them. 2 things that are critically important, at least on my journey, right, which is how do you look at and make pivots and adjustments to a business model, and then how do you set up the infrastructure for growth? When you care about the profit, right, that gets derived by a business, either for you, your co-founders, for your team, for your investors, sometimes you skimp, right, on making investments in the infrastructure, and sometimes that can not go well. The other areas that we found that really influence success or not are there guiding documents, right, that help you to make decisions and help you to decide if there is a dispute between founders and investors or just among founders, right? How do you navigate the business to its safe place, right, when everybody doesn't agree on where it should be going? And sometimes there are no governing documents, right, that exist that say how you manage through these difficulties. As we sort of go through that as well, sometimes there's no coherent model to look at acquisition opportunities as they present themselves to your business, right? Or deals you might want to do, right? Maybe you want to set up a merger. Maybe you want to go buy companies. And a lack of ability to really have a structured way to look at that is something a lot of folks have found to not really, set them up for a path to success. And the last 2 areas are the things that nobody likes to talk about, right? Disaster preparedness and succession planning. Exactly, right? Exactly. Because you, as a founder of a business or as a leader of a business, you are often so who you are is often so woven into the fabric of that business that from a succession planning standpoint, it's hard to imagine you not being there. And as I like to talk to folks, look, there's 2 things that are important about succession. One, there's what happens if you get hit by a bus, right? And what do you do in an emergency so that your team at the business and your family's livelihoods are not put at risk, right? And again, it's hard to replace a lot of people, but you can try to figure out how might you if you had to in an emergency. And then there's those longer term succession planning issues, right? Where it's, am I looking at generational succession where I want to properly train, the next generation to take over the business? Or is it folks who are on the management team who are going to step into elevated roles over some period of time? And, a lot of that has to be thought through. A lot of it has to be managed, right? Because if succession takes too long for somebody who's really talented, they're going to leave unless they see a real pathway and you invest in the training. So, that's been one thing I think that to your point, nobody likes to talk about, nobody likes to think about, but you have to think about it on 2 levels, right? The near-term emergencies and the long-term. And then as far as disasters go, right, there's the human capital disasters, right, that are kind of a piece of succession planning. But then there's the other disasters. And I don't know if any of us really could have been prepared, right, for COVID. I don't really know if any of us were probably that well prepared for the Great Recession and the way that it it played out, despite market signals probably that should have been telling us it was coming. But, there's all kinds of disasters that happen, right? There's natural disasters that can impact businesses. I mean, certainly the tragic, events that we're seeing playing out around the globe, right? With wars, the, unfortunate natural disasters that have occurred, in Lahaina and other places recently. There's things that you can't even contemplate might happen. But if you really think about it, you might say, hey, something bad could happen. What would I do about it? Right. And how would my business either, how are we going to get insurance? Right. Which is obviously the first place people usually go. And, beyond that, though, how are you going to sustain your operations? Right. And that time at a financial services company that's heavily regulated, right? The federal regulations around managing disasters for financial institutions are pretty robust. So there's some pretty hard requirements. And if you take those to a sort of leaner implementation model, you can, without all the regulatory oversight, you can actually come up with a pretty great way to look at what you should be doing in your business if foreseeable disasters come home. You might have great ways to respond to those, right? So,
yeah.
So those are the 8 categories. Yeah.
What strikes me as I hear you go through each of the 8 is that I can't think of a single one of those that's exciting from the perspective of the business owner.
Right.
Because they all have to do with setting up protocols. If something happens in the future, how are you going to handle it? Yep. Not just from a risk management standpoint, but what model are you going to use to evaluate potential mergers, potential purchases? If you're sitting in that seat, you don't want to create a model. You just want to evaluate the deals when they come through, so you have more latitude to do what you want at that time, right? Why back yourself into a corner and create some quote unquote unnecessary structure? Same thing for governance. Same thing for and especially succession. And so what strikes me as I hear you describe all these items is that, number one, they're not comfortable, and number two, you made the point about the fact that a lot of people don't identify these issues or these steps until they've already exited from the business and have an opportunity to really reflect when it's all said and done on what went right and what went wrong. And it's just a good testament to having some protocol, some process where you get out of the office a little bit and just try to see the forest from the trees and look at things from the 30,000 foot level every now and then, either on your own or perhaps through maybe some consultants or professionals, some guided process to help you through there. It's just hugely beneficial, because when you're in, the trenches every single day, it's just, it seems basic, but it's impossible to see the forest from the trees.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, to your point, these are not the things that you normally like to think about, right? And so to make it more engaging, right, a lot of the structure is the process to try to get yourself, right, to think about these things, either as an individual, right, who's solely leading a business, or with your management team or your governance team, which when I use governance, right, I don't mean that exclusively in the traditional board of directors sense, right? It could just be you and your founders. It could be you and your lawyer and accountant or financial planner, right? Having these conversations and kind of looking at these and saying, what are the problems that exist? What are the opportunities we want to seize? And that's where the fun part comes in, right? What are the opportunities that we can seize? And then how do we get there, right? And then you kind of look at these solution concepts to the problems and opportunities, and the problems are the unpleasant part and the opportunities are the fun part, right? And you kind of put those together and say, at least I like to tell most folks who are running small businesses, you probably need to pick one thing, at most 3 things that you can do, right, as priorities. Mm-hmm. And depending upon the scale of your organization, if you try to do more than that, you're never going to get anything, right? So pick 1 if you're really small, pick up to 3 if you're like reasonably sized, right? Like you got 100 people, so you can assign leads for these different initiatives. But part of it is chronicling the problem and the opportunity and the solution concept, and then putting some of the contextual data around that, and then trying to decide, using an organized process, right, what's the priorities, and then only planning for the things you think you're going to implement, right? And understanding before you implement what it's really going to take to get it done, so that when you go to implementation, you're not surprised that something took $50,000 you didn't know you had to spend, right? Or that that it was going to take you 6 months and you thought it was going to take you 6 weeks, right? So it's this really organized process that helps businesses to really stay aligned. And to your point, revisiting them regularly and trying to make the time to do that is something that it does take discipline, right?
Yeah.
And it takes being comfortable with talking about difficult things and dealing with some of the unpleasantness, right? That isn't the optimism of let's grow the top line, let's grow the bottom line, let's go recruit some amazing people to work with. Because at the end of the day, we all know it's more complex than that, right?
Right. Dan Sullivan has written about this in the past, and I'm trying to remember the title of the book. I think it's 10x is easier than 2x. Does that sound right?
Right, something like that. Yeah, that's right.
So he's in his point. His books are very quick reads, by the way. They're about 130 pages. They're small print. It could be a blog post, really, so you can knock it off in an afternoon. But his point in this one was that you should be thinking about how to 10x your business, not 2x your business.
Yep.
Not for the sake of just getting 10 times bigger, but for the sake of when you view it through that lens, if you're actually going to do that, you have to immediately eliminate like 80% of the stuff you're doing on a day-to-day basis right now and only focus on the 20% of things that are going to help you get to the 10x, which is strikingly similar to what I hear you saying right now is just pick out a couple things, just pick out the most important things, forget all the rest, which theoretically is very easy. In practice, it is exceptionally difficult.
Well, and to your point, right, and I think he hits this, and I certainly believe it, which is if you're really looking at what's most important, you will ultimately probably get to those things that initially are less important. Because if you're doing the most important things right the first time, you're going to be able to get to those less important initiatives. If you're doing them wrong and you're not thinking them through, you're going to keep chasing the same thing over and over and over again, right? So, yeah.
So how do you make sure you do them right the first time? I mean, a lot of this stuff is if you're coming up with a protocol for how to evaluate potential mergers and you've never been through a merger before, and how do you do that right?
Yep. Well, and to your point, this is what I love to tell people is there's an amazing opportunity to get advice, right? What I always tell people is they're experts, right? And whether it's, how do you look at mergers and acquisition opportunities, or how do you look at, you've got this really, you've got an LLC, right? You've got an operating agreement. It's 4 pages long, doesn't really give you much around what happens if one of the founders ends up, with a marital breakup and their spouse ends up with half of their interest in the business, right? There's no model to discuss how does voting happen, right? How do decisions get made? What can we do to try to manage around those shares? And, or if one of the co-founders, unfortunately decides they want to walk away from the business, maybe it's health issues, maybe it's lack of interest. How do you value the exit of that, right? I mean, it's really easy if you have the right advisors guiding you, to providing you with information to allow you to make decisions. And what I tell folks is there's a point though where you need to do it yourself, right? And a lot of this to me is you have to trust yourself and your team to actually be the ones who really dive in once you've got that advice, right? Around whether it's legal, whether it's accounting, whether it's, operational, right? Around mergers and acquisitions, or even how do you set up a board of directors, right? And compensate people effectively. At the end of the day, you and your team, you've got to make those decisions and you've got to be the ones who implement it, right? And I think it's really easy, to your point, when you say, I'm not an expert in everything, right? I need help, to sometimes end up falling into a trap where you give too much operational assignment, too many operational assignments to folks who are not part of your team on a daily basis, either as your founders, your investors, your employees. And that's where you end up, I think, with a lot of folks starting to say, well, who's really running this business? Am I running this business anymore? Am I part of the team? So I think to your point, there's a great way to seek advice from folks who've been there. There's a great way to make sure you get that data you need to make better decisions, but you and your team, you really have to make the decisions, right? And be the ones who carry out the plans.
Right. I have a business. I'm part of a business coaching group for owners of financial advisory firms. And one thing that they say over and over and over again is that when the vision is clear, the decisions become easy. And this is an area where when you're going into uncharted territory, it's easy to just be overwhelmed and not have any semblance of whether somebody's advice or somebody's model or somebody's suggestion is congruent with what you're really trying to accomplish or not. Which is why that exercise of having a clear vision that you and all the stakeholders have bought into, and a mission for that's the overarching guide for the company. If there's any gray area, look to the mission statement for some
Exactly.
guidance, is just so important. And at the beginning, it's just so hard to
Yeah,
articulate for a lot of
that's
people.
right. Well, and look, to your point, when you start a business, the first thing you're probably trying to figure out is how do I make sure that either, that your teammates and you and your families continue to eat, or the second thing you're trying to do is figure out how do you get your investors, right, who put their money in, maybe their friends, maybe their family, maybe their VCs, how do they get their money back, right, and
Mm-hmm.
and get the return that they were expecting. You end up doing a lot of shortcuts, right? And I certainly early on was guilty of this, right? So, again, some of it goes back to the legal documents, right? You have, from a corporate standpoint, you've got articles of incorporation, but you never had a shareholder agreement, right? You've got, from the LLC standpoint, a very lightweight operating agreement that doesn't define how you get yourself out of these situations. And, when it comes to investments, right? You maybe sit there and go, okay, well, I don't need to invest in a CRM yet, right? Because, hey, we're managing the sales. It's me and my partner. We're the only ones handling it. We communicate. It's not scalable, right? Your team may say, hey, do we have a plan for this? Do we have a process for this? Oh yeah, we do. It's on the shared drive. Okay, that's cool. I have no idea how to find it on the shared drive, nor do I know what it's called, right? So, making some investments, even if you keep it all on a shared drive rather than like a formal knowledge management system, making the investment of time to make sure that the processes and procedures and operational models are, searchable and accessible, right, is sometimes of critical importance. And those are the things when you're, working 80, 100-hour weeks, you don't have time to invest in because you're concerned about that top line and the bottom
Mm-hmm.
line, and you're not as concerned about the infrastructure piece. So yeah, to your point, I often find that, it's sort of like year 2, year 3, right, of businesses. If you've made it that far, right, the key is figuring out how you get to where you want to go, which is either sustained operations or an exit. We all have seen the statistics around how quickly businesses can fail, right? And how few make it to year 2, year 3, year 5. It's usually that year 2, year 3 where folks understand if they've really got something that's going to continue. And that's really the point where you have to start focusing on rebuilding, right? Because nobody gets it built right out of the gate, right?
Yeah.
There's too many other demands on your time to have that clarity of thought, to be able to create that clarity of plan.
Right. Right. So they're switching gears just slightly.
Yep.
There are a bunch of books that have been written on topics like this, so it's
Yep.
success formulas for business. And one of my favorites that I have sent to dozens of clients is Traction by Gino Wickman,
Yep.
which is similar to the structure of success, but it's probably more prescriptive in that it provides an operating framework for businesses to use and run in order to get to that
Right.
ideal vision or whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish over the next 3 or so years. How would you compare, not in terms of quality, but is the structure of success to a more prescriptive framework like Traction?
So, what I would say is, look, one of the great things about, sort of the business genre, right, of books and of articles is there's no shortage of folks who can tell you their anecdotal or, empirical research and what the outcomes are. At the end of the day, I think everybody needs to find sort of what is comfortable to them and what advice works. And there's certainly, no shortage of books that I tend to, grab from time to time to refresh, my own thinking around things that others have said, that are particularly useful. And a lot of, a lot of the things that, to your point, I tend to look at in, the whether it's Traction or whether it's other books, I am not a natural born salesperson, right? Just not how I'm wired. So I tend to need to really to look at adjustments and pivots in the structure of success model. I really have to make sure that I get my head tuned in to the sales data and the market data from two sources. One is clients and the other is team. And, when you look at a lot of the tenets around, Traction, right? There's a lot of these concepts, I think, that are very sales in orientation. And a lot of business leaders are natural salespeople. And I think that's really a great thing, because if you're a revenue creator, right, you can generally make sure that there's going to be stuff coming in the door. Now, whether you can deliver on that, because if you're just selling, right, you may or may not be selling something that ends up being hugely profitable. You may not be selling something that's scalable. The way that I tend to look at sort of the structure of success versus some other books that are out there is I try to take what I'll characterize as, I played a lot of soccer for the rest of the world, football, as a kid. There's folks who create goals from the front, right? The strikers, the classic number 10. Then, there's deep lying midfielders, right? Deep lying midfielders are people who think more defensively, but can actually create goals. And so, I think when I look at the structure of success, I tend to sort of take a balanced approach between, the people who are revenue creators and the people who are, more traditionally operators, and try to balance those two pieces in a way that I haven't seen, maybe many of the other books balancing those two parts, right? So those attackers and defenders coming together with one operational concept. And part of that's just because naturally I'm not a salesperson. So it's harder for me to get the revenue engine going than it is to think about how to operate it once it goes. The other piece, and this was actually something when I started drafting the book that the editorial team who were reviewing drafts, and they did a great job, by the way, pulling it together. The team at Ink Originals does a wonderful job, and Greenleaf, who supports them. What I wanted to talk about failure out of the gate, because I think that's something I think about all the time, right? I never want to fail. Most business books, because the goal isn't to have people feeling bad when you read a business book, right? Nobody likes to talk about failure. And so one of the interesting things about the structure of success was what's chapter 3 was, in my original vision, chapter 1. Let's talk about failure. Let's talk about why it happens. Let's talk about how to avoid it. And of course, that's not fun, right? So I think rightfully so, the editorial team was like, hey, got it. Nobody talks about it. There's a reason. It's not easy to sell books if you talk about it. They're 100% right. So I think, one of the biggest differences is getting business leaders to be comfortable with the idea that it's okay to talk about failure. And if we study it, right, it's easier to succeed. I mean, there's that old adage, right, where, in Silicon Valley in the heyday, people would say, well, how many times have you failed, right? Because if you failed once or you failed twice, you probably aren't going to make the same mistakes. So you're probably going to do a better investment, right? And so, to an extent, maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But the whole point to me is, if you study it, you can avoid it, right? And I think that's something that I think is really different about sort of the approach here. Talk about things that go wrong so you can try to make things go right.
Right. Now, these 8 foundational pieces, is that the framework that you're using with your ACME and your Initiative Labs clients?
So with Initiative Labs, yes. And with Initiative Labs, what we do is we essentially, talk about the concepts in the book, talk about the structured approach, and then talk about the 8 areas, and, have a conversation with business owners around where they may go as they do their own, assessment, planning, and implementation activities. We help them to kind of launch things, but we don't go hands-on and carry through in a traditional consulting model. With ACME, it's been interesting. We've applied sort of a derivative in some ways of the approach, because some of our work has been about setting up organizations, right? So some has been about, new organizations inside of government agencies, and we really help and we use some of those concepts. The thing that we've been doing more with ACME is a product oriented or technology driven solutions approach that in some ways has an overlap because it all starts with problems and opportunities and solution concepts. But rather than a business structure, these are generally products or services that have a public sector role, be it national security or anything down to even state and local government.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So a couple things come to mind and ACME and Initiative Labs are both generally trying to help organizations maintain innovation and viability, right?
Exactly.
So a couple things come to mind that are related to this. Number one, you gave the example earlier. If you're in a situation where you have revenue coming in, you have your expenses, you have some profitability in the company, but either you need to take the profitability out of the business to appease investors or your family or whatever, it's seductive to do so as opposed to putting it back in to fuel innovation. On the other hand, it seems to me that we're in the middle of this technological renaissance where we now have the internet, which is ubiquitous all around the world. We have the rapid build out of AI and all that's we're in like the second inning of that right now.
Right.
It seems like those long-term opportunities are too attractive to pass up if you're in that situation.
Right.
So can you help me understand this a little bit better? Where are people going wrong when they're underestimating the importance of continued innovation and why is this continually happening?
Yeah. So, look, to your point, there's two different ways, right, that I think folks can operate. And, there's on one hand, the scenario where you ignore signals and you ignore opportunities because we've always done it this way, right? On the other hand, you've got folks who say, oh, generative AI is amazing. I need to put, everything we do as a business, we need to put into Chat GPT and have it spit out answers. Okay, well, you've probably provided, a lot of the world with a lot of data that will inform their answers, right? So, one of the things we talk to folks about generative AI is there's a right way to ask questions to get answers that are helpful to you, but there's a right way to make sure that you don't give away everything you're thinking about to sort of the general generative AI models that will produce information that your competitors may find beneficial. And when you get into the government space, there's a whole another level of what you shouldn't be putting into generative AI models that are public. So, I think what we're talking to a lot of folks around interesting technologies is the right way to use them for your business, given the considerations. And the other thing that we're telling folks who we've always done it this way is, well, just because you've always done it this way doesn't mean it's going to work moving forward, right? As you scale or as the marketplace changes, as your competition landscape changes. So to your point, we've got folks on both ends of those spectrum that, you have to try to pull them to the logical middle. Right.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. That's a very good analogy. And if you're on the we've always done it this way end of the spectrum, doing stuff different is risky. And particularly if you're at the latter stages of your own career, then you might not see the need to take a whole lot of risks in your own glide path. But I'll tell you another thing. Everywhere I've ever worked, if you use the words we've always done it this way in response to somebody asking you why this is happening, that's an immediate and substantial demerit. I mean, that must be the worst response ever if you're trying to run an organization well.
Right. And but one thing I will say is it is interesting the number of times that you find folks and whether they say those words or whether they mean those words, right? Without saying them. It is interesting that, you do end up with a certain amount of inertia, right? Where you're just caring and understanding how to change from that can often be difficult, right? And so, we've certainly seen scenarios where whether it's new government regulations or whether it is general economic conditions where, no one says we've always done it this way, but folks might say, I've never seen something like this and I have no idea how to approach it, right? And to your point, that's where you need that sort of innovation thinking that focuses on the inside of the business, right? Whether that's the approach, whether that's adding new talent to a governance team. And, one of the things that I like to talk about is I had two friends who had an environmental services business doing great on revenue, doing great on profit. One of the things they weren't seeing eye to eye on was how to reinvest that profit, right? And what to take off the table, what to purchase as far as new equipment, what to invest in as far as human capital. And when it comes to governance, one of the reasons I say a board of directors in the traditional sort of like corporate sense is not always what we mean. They came to me and they said, hey, look, we would like to add you to our board meetings. We're a board of two founders. You don't get a vote. We're going to compensate you, but you don't get a vote. You don't get any equity. We want you to be there to help provide other inputs to our conversations and to help us think through things, talk through things. We don't disagree that much, but we just think it would be helpful to have somebody else there, but we don't want to give up any power, right? And, I thought this is really actually a pretty interesting innovation, right, as far as how you govern, because you've got two people. So if they disagree, 1-to-1, loggerheads, right? Not going to get anywhere. And what they're asking for is somebody else to be there to try to be reflective. And maybe this vote and this vote are actually voting about the wrong thing and it's over here. Or maybe there needs to be a conversation to say, look, I understand what you're saying. I appreciate you don't really want to do this. But look, the data is showing you this view is correct, right?
Right.
If I were in your shoes, I would make that. I don't have a vote, but I'm telling you, I would go this way. So I thought that was pretty cool. And, to me, that's one of the great things, right, about running a business is you get to try new things and you get to try new inputs. And so, we've always done it this way, whether it's vocalized or whether it's just in an organization, to have, whether it's the structure of success or whether it's traction or whether it's some other, theory around the framework of how you operate a business, you have to be willing to embrace that change, right? And a lot of what I like to sort of tell folks is there's some of the chapters up front are about, the context for making decisions and doing business planning. And some of that's coming from your experience, but you've got to open it up a little bit, right? And be comfortable with change, be comfortable with taking new inputs, searching for new inputs, right? And obviously that's one of the things where reading books and reading articles can be helpful, or getting third parties who aren't really part of your business ownership team or your management team to be involved in those conversations. And what I like to tell people is worrying productively, right? I'm a worrier by nature. So I tend to, be concerned about things, even when probably there's not a reason to be concerned, even when things are going well, right? I'm nervous. But, for me, channeling worry into productive worry was something I had to work on, right? To think about, okay, as you're worrying, if we're worrying about this, how do we solve it, right? And how do we create the plan to solve it? Other people don't worry enough, right? And so getting them to say, hey, for a minute, just think before you run, right? And just think about the consequences as you're running this direction. What do you need to do? Oh, I forgot to tell, our entire team that we're suddenly making this change on the way we're selling this product, right? Because these things happen. Like, as crazy as it sounds, these things happen. And so, a lot of what I find in organizations is creating the right mental model, right? Which, to your point, is that balance between history and future, right? And bringing that together in a way that you get everybody running the same direction once you figure out where to go.
Right. So what's the next book going to be on?
Great question. I will tell you, I have a couple of ideas that I've been playing with. Nothing set in stone yet, and I think, candidly, as you probably do, in your business and in these podcasts, you kind of see where the world takes you, right? And see what seems interesting. And I kind of have a theory that if I don't socialize a concept enough to know if it's valuable, then it's not worth writing, right? And if we haven't used it enough to see if it actually has value, it certainly isn't worth publishing. So I don't know. We'll see where the world goes. So
right on. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation, Patrick. It's great to meet you. It's great to hear about your background and the structure of the book. I've been interested in the book for a while, and I apologize for not having read it by the time we had a chance to speak. But it, like I say, it is on the list, and I will. For people who are interested about you and your organizations, where can we send them? Where can we send them to buy the book?
Perfect. So, the book is available at all your standard online retailers, right? Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Bookshop, Books A Million, and others, in some of your local bookstores, depending upon where you are. PatrickEsposito.com is a great way to kind of, keep up with both the book, as well as with the activities at ACME General Corp, which has its own website, acmegeneral.com, and Initiative Labs at initiativelabs.com.
Very cool. Well, this has been great. I thank you again for joining us today and sharing some of your wisdom. You've picked up a lot of it through a really interesting career thus far, and I'm looking forward to see where you take it next.
Well, thanks for having me, Grant. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners optimize income, pay less in tax, and invest prudently. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever you digest podcasts to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes and announcements, and feel free to submit questions to growmoneybusiness.com.